At the hospital my son signed, "Do not resuscitate her." But the doctor looked at me and said, "She owns this place." My name is Margaret Hill. I am 72 years old, and for most of my life I believed that no matter what storms came my way, my son would be my anchor. I was wrong. It happened on an ordinary Thursday morning. I had been in my kitchen, humming softly while stirring a pot of soup, when suddenly the room tilted. My hands slipped from the ladle, and the floor rushed up to meet me. There was a sharp ringing in my ears, then blackness. When I woke again, the lights above me were too white, too sharp. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose. I was in a hospital bed, wires pressed against my chest, an oxygen mask tight on my face. I blinked and turned my head. Nurses moved quickly around me, their shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. And then I saw him, my son David, standing at the edge of the room with his arms crossed. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, and his face, my son's face, was carved from stone. "David," I whispered, my throat dry as dust. His eyes flicked toward me, cold, impatient. "You should rest, Mother," he said, like my presence was an inconvenience, like I was a client wasting his time. A nurse leaned closer. "Don't speak too much. Save your energy." But I couldn't stop watching him. My son. My only child. Minutes later, I heard his voice outside the curtain. His tone was low, but my ears, sharpened by a mother's instinct, caught every syllable. "She's too weak," David said firmly. "She's lived long enough. Just sign the DNR." The nurse hesitated. "Sir, a do not resuscitate order is not taken lightly. Are you certain this is what she would want?" David's reply was ice. "She wouldn't want to suffer. Don't waste resources keeping her alive. Just let her go." My heart clenched tighter than the wires strapped across my chest. My own son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the child I had fed when I went hungry, the man I believed would hold my hand when the world turned dark, was asking them to let me die. I lay there, frozen, tears sliding silently into my hair. My lips trembled against the mask. I wanted to scream, to shout, to remind him of the nights I carried him through fevers, the mornings I walked miles to get him to school, the afternoons I worked extra shifts so he could go to college. But the oxygen hissed louder than my voice. The doctor entered quietly, papers in hand. I recognized the clipboard instantly. Legal documents. Consent forms. The dreaded DNR. David straightened. His shoulders squared like a man closing a business deal. "Doctor," he said crisply, "please do what's necessary." The doctor's eyes flicked from him to me. For a moment, something softened in the man's gaze. He stepped closer to my bed, adjusting the monitor as though it needed attention, but really I felt he was giving me a chance to speak. "Ma'am," he said gently, "are you aware of what your son is requesting?" My breath came shallow. The words refused to leave my lips. I blinked rapidly, a tear sliding down the corner of my eye. "She understands," David cut in quickly. "She's tired. This is best." Best. The word echoed in my head like a cruel joke. Best for him, perhaps. Best for a son who saw his mother as a burden, an obstacle, a problem to erase with a single signature. The pen scraped across the paper as David leaned down. "Just sign it, doctor. She wouldn't want to suffer." But I wasn't suffering. Not from my illness, at least. My real suffering was lying here, alive, listening to my child declare my death with a steady voice and steady hand. The nurse shifted nervously. I could hear her whisper to another. "She looks alert. Shouldn't she decide?" But David silenced her with a glare. "I'm her son. I know what's best." Closed my eyes. Images flashed behind my lids. David as a little boy, giggling when I chased him around the yard. His small hands clutching my skirt when he was frightened. His sleepy head on my shoulder when he was too tired to walk. And now here he was, the same child, grown into a man, signing away the breath that had once given him life. The doctor hesitated again. His fingers lingered on the form, his jaw tightening. Are you absolutely sure, Mr. Hill? David's voice hardened. Yes. Sign it. And in that moment I felt a tear fall, not because I feared death, but because I realized my son had already killed something far more precious. The bond between us. The love I thought could never be broken. I lay silent, praying the truth of my story would one day be known. Praying that justice, in whatever form, would find its way to me. Because this was not the end. Not yet. When people talk about mothers, they imagine soft hands and warm kitchens. They rarely picture the night bus, a plastic hairnet, and the ache in your feet that refuses to leave even when you lie down. But that was my motherhood. Not a postcard, a promise paid in installments. David's father left when our son was 5. He packed a single suitcase and a speech about needing space, as if space were a country men run to when they grow tired of responsibility. I remember the click of the door, the way the walls seemed to lean in, listening for me to break. I didn't. I went to the sink, washed a single spoon, and made a list. List saved me. Rent, daycare, groceries, bus fare. A line for emergencies that was always empty but written anyway, like a prayer. I took a day job at the laundromat on Maple and a night shift washing dishes at Rosa's Diner. My hands smelled of bleach and lemon, and the skin cracked in winter until every coin I touched stung. In the mornings, I braided David's hair the way he liked, tight, neat rows that made him feel fast on the playground. He would inspect himself in our bathroom mirror, the glass mottled with age, and then look up at me, serious. Do I look smart, Mama? Smart and kind, I'd say, tying his shoelaces. Smart is how you climb. Kind is how you stay. We shared a single winter coat those first 2 years after his father left. I wore it to the bus stop at 4 a.m. and brought it back warm for him by 7:30. On the days snow came hard, I wrapped his scarf twice and pretended I wasn't cold. Mothers learn to pretend. There was a night when he burned like a small furnace. The thermometer blinked 103 and my heart chewed through the quiet. We had no car and the bus service had ended, so I filled a bowl with cool water, wrung out a towel, and pressed it to his forehead, counting his breaths. I'm here, I whispered. I'm here. Every time he stirred, I sang the off-key lullaby my mother sang to me, a driftwood tune that knew how to float a child through bad water. By dawn his fever broke. I washed the bowl and left for work with my eyes still swollen, and when Rosa asked if I'd been crying, I said I'd chopped onions. Mothers learn to lie softly for the right reasons. School forms asked for father's name. I wrote unavailable, the most dignified word I could find for abandonment. When Father-Child Day came, I put on a borrowed blazer and sat with the men who smelled of cologne and weekend. I didn't look at them, I looked at David. He was coloring a rocket ship like the one he said we'd ride someday, to a place where money didn't make rules. On the way home he held my hand and said, "Your jacket is too big." "It's borrowing courage," I told him. We kept a savings jar on top of the fridge. "College," the masking tape read, letters wobbling from a 5-year-old hand. Every coin I emptied from my apron pockets at night went into that jar. Every time he lost a tooth, half the tooth fairy money went in too. He never complained. Once, I caught him tipping in the 2 quarters he'd been given for helping Mrs. Delgado carry groceries. "For future me," he said, grinning. I kissed his head and went into the bathroom to cry where the water could disguise it. When his shoes wore thin, I learned the art of glue and patience. I pressed the sole and the leather together and sat with the little pair on my lap like a wounded bird I could coax back to life. On his 7th birthday, I bought him a second-hand library card because the books were free and the future hid in paper. We spent Saturdays in the cool hush between shelves, the world going quiet enough for hope to speak. He'd pick dinosaur books first, then space, then anything with maps. At night he spread them on the floor, charting routes out of our small apartment with his finger. "Where do you want to go?" he asked once. "Far," he said without looking up, then softer. "But I want you to come." "I will," I promised. "I always do." He had a gift for numbers. In 3rd grade his teacher, Mr. Palmer, called me in. I braced for bad news. the way the poor do, preemptively. Instead, he pointed at a line of neat sums. David solved the challenge set meant for fifth graders, he said. He should be in the math club. Is there a fee? Yes. $10, he said, then added quickly. But we have scholarships. Paid it anyway. I scrubbed an extra tray at the diner and turned the 10 over like a coin trick, making something appear from nothing. The night of the math fair, David stood by a trifold display about Fibonacci sequences, explaining spirals like a boy who believed in patterns where the rest of us saw only mess. I clapped until my hands ached. On the bus home he leaned his head on my arm and whispered, "I think the universe counts, Mama." "So do you," I said. When he broke his arm falling from the jungle gym, I learned the geography of emergency rooms. The fluorescent lights. The vending machines that never changed their mind. A resident named Dr. Ahmed gave me a spare blanket and told me to rest. I didn't. I sat on a plastic chair and watched my son sleep, tracing the cast with my eyes as if love could set bone faster. Before discharge, the nurse asked for insurance. I handed her a shoelace of forms and a smile tidy enough to look competent. We made a payment plan that lasted a year. I kept every receipt in an envelope labeled proof. Poor women collect proof. It's how we argue with systems that forget our names. When a boy at school laughed at David's frayed backpack, I stitched a red patch on it that night and said, "It's a badge. Adventurers carry them." The next day, 3 boys asked where they could get one. For an afternoon, poverty masqueraded as fashion, and we both enjoyed the trick. Middle school came with sharp edges. David wanted brand-name shoes and the shirts kids on TV wore. I couldn't give him those, so I gave him pride. "We are not cheap," I told him. "We are careful. There's a difference." He rolled his eyes the first time, but months later I heard him repeat it to a friend. Careful. The word tasted like dignity. He was accepted into a magnet high school across town. The bus ride added an hour each way. I walked to the laundromat in the dark with a thermos of coffee and waited for the first cycle to finish before calling him to wake. "You'll be late," I'd say. "The world won't wait." He joined debate. He learned to look people in the eye and make his voice a tool, not a wish. At his first tournament, he wore a suit jacket from the thrift store and spoke like a boy who had discovered that sentences could open doors. I sat in the back row, quiet as a secret, and cheered by memorizing his every word. There were hard days. The day the rent jumped and my stomach clenched like a fist. The night a pipe burst and water fell through our ceiling, baptizing our small living room in chaos. The week I sold my wedding ring to keep the lights on. The pawnshop owner weighed it like a judge weighs mercy. "You sure?" he asked. He nodded. The band left a pale circle on my finger that looked, for a while, like hope had stripped me clean. I told myself I was not losing a symbol. I was buying time. On Sundays, I cooked a pot of beans big enough to pretend abundance. We ate at the table no matter how tired, because the table was where families stayed families. We played a game called Gratefuls. He'd say, "You go first." I'd say, "Roof. Shoes that don't leak. The way you laugh with your eyes." He'd say, "You. Always you." And every time, I wanted to believe gratitude breeds gratitude the way seeds breed gardens. The truth sneaks in quietly. It came first as small dismissals. The way he flinched when I hugged him near school, the way he corrected my grammar at the grocery store. Then bigger ones. The day he asked me not to come to the award ceremony because parents were for freshman year. The afternoon he came home with a pair of shoes more expensive than our rent and said a friend had helped. Asked which friend. He shrugged a shrug that learned how to lie. Still, when he crossed the stage at graduation, his stole bright with honors, I clapped and cried and thought, this is it. This is the moment every 4 a.m. bus, every burned hand, every counted coin becomes worth it. I hugged him so tight he laughed, embarrassed, and said, "Mama, not in front of everyone. Let go." Mothers learn to let go in slow slices, the kind that don't bleed until later. I thought love would be enough to raise gratitude. I was wrong. People often say that success changes a man. I don't believe that. Success doesn't change. It reveals. What was buried deep in David came clawing to the surface the moment he tasted comfort. When he graduated from college, I thought I had reached the end of a hard road. He walked across the stage in his pressed gown, diploma in hand, and the future seemed to glow around him like light through stained glass. I sat there clutching my handbag, tears running freely down my face. My boy had made it. My sacrifices had not been in vain. He smiled for the cameras that day, but not for me. Later, when we went to eat, he scolded me for the second-hand dress I wore. "Mom, you should have told me you didn't have anything decent. You embarrassed me in front of my friends." The words struck harder than any slap. I had ironed that dress the night before, careful with the collar, smoothing out the wrinkles. It was the same dress I wore when I accepted the Community Service Award for working double shifts at the clinic. To him it was shameful. To me it was history stitched into fabric. That was the first wound, and like all first wounds, it bled longer. As David entered the corporate world, the distance widened. At first it was subtle. Phone calls that grew shorter, texts that went unanswered. He said he was busy. I believed him. When I visited his small apartment to drop off a care package, he barely looked up from his laptop. "Mom, you didn't have to come. People might think I can't take care of myself." I remember clutching the bag of food tighter. "I just wanted to make sure you're eating." He sighed, exasperated, as if my love were a burden. "I'm not a kid anymore." I left the package on the counter and walked out quietly, pretending I didn't hear the click of relief in his voice when the door closed. Marriage and the poisoned well. When David met Anna, I hoped she would soften him, remind him of the boy who used to laugh freely in our small kitchen. She was beautiful, polished, and sharp-tongued. She shook my hand at our first meeting like she was inspecting an item at an auction. Later that evening I overheard her whisper, "Your mom's sweet, but she's a little too simple for our circle." Simple. The word stayed with me, stinging. I had been called poor, tired, even stubborn. But never simple. After their wedding, my role in David's life shrank to the margins. Invitations to dinners arrived late, if at all. When I did attend, Anna would offer a smile too bright, then make small jokes about my clothes or my humble background. Guests laughed politely. David never defended me. One night, at a party in their new townhouse, she handed me a tray of glasses. "Could you help pass these around?" she asked sweetly. Froze. The guests turned. Laughter rippled. And in that moment I understood. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as staff. I placed the tray back on the counter and left before dessert. David called the next morning. "Why'd you walk out? You embarrassed Anna in front of everyone." Embarrassed. The same word again, sharper now. A blade honed on years of sacrifice he had already forgotten. Then came the requests, always wrapped in entitlement. "Mom, you should think about selling the old house. It's too much for you. We could use the money. Mom, don't keep working. We'll take care of you." Yet when bills came, their care evaporated. They began to circle me like hawks. Every conversation veered toward property, inheritance, what I would leave behind. I realized they weren't waiting for my future. They were planning it. The cruelty grew bolder. When I fell ill with pneumonia, I called David, hoping he would sit by my bedside. He answered with irritation. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Can't you call an ambulance yourself?" An ambulance? Not a son. I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to the static after he hung up, and I knew something had snapped in him long before that call. Perhaps in college. Perhaps earlier. Perhaps gratitude had simply never taken root. The day he walked into the hospital room, telling the doctor to sign away my life, I wasn't shocked. Heartbroken, yes. Devastated, yes. But shocked. No. His transformation had been a slow poison. It dripped into our lives over years. Mockery disguised as jokes, distance disguised as busyness, cruelty disguised as practicality. And now here we were. He stood at my bedside, cold eyes fixed on the doctor, and I realized with terrifying clarity, my son no longer saw me as a mother. He saw me as a liability. And I, foolishly, had believed that love could never turn to profit. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal. Machines hummed softly, their blinking lights counting the seconds I had left, as if my life could be reduced to green numbers on a screen. Outside the thin curtain, voices murmured, nurses exchanging instructions, footsteps clicking against tile. But in my ears only one voice thundered, my son's. "Doctor, you're wasting time," David said, his tone clipped sharp. "She wouldn't want to drag this out. Just sign the order." The words cut through me. He didn't say my mother. He didn't even say she. He said this, as if I were already gone. I tried to shift in the bed, to pull the mask from my face, to speak. But the tubes were tangled, and my arms felt like stone. My chest rose and fell in shallow, aching motions. The weight of helplessness pressed down harder than the illness itself. The doctor, a man with kind eyes and weary lines etched across his face, held the clipboard but did not move his pen. He glanced at me, then back at David. "Mr. Hill," he said carefully, "this is a serious decision. A do not resuscitate order is only signed when a patient is." "She's weak," David interrupted. "Look at her. She can't even talk. Do you want her to suffer more?" The way he said it, so casual, so businesslike, made bile rise in my throat. Suffer. He had no idea what suffering was. Suffering was selling my wedding ring so he could have new textbooks. Suffering was working through a fever so his shoes didn't have holes. Suffering was giving everything I had so he could stand here today in an expensive suit, looking down at me as though I were already buried. The nurse beside the doctor hesitated. "Sir, the patient is conscious. Shouldn't we at least?" David's voice snapped like a whip. "I'm her son. I know what's best. Sign it." My pulse hammered wildly in my ears. I forced my lips to move beneath the oxygen mask. No sound came, only a faint rasp. Tears blurred my vision as I tried again, willing even a single word to escape. "No." The syllable was small, broken, but it was mine. The nurse leaned closer. "She's trying to speak." David's jaw tightened. "It's just reflex. She doesn't know what she's saying." The doctor's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering there. He lowered the clipboard. "Reflex or not, she's communicating. And until I hear directly from her, I won't sign this." David's composure cracked for the first time. His voice rose, cold and furious. "You don't understand. She's lived her life. She has nothing left. Letting her go is mercy." Mercy. That word burned worse than fire. Mercy was holding your child's fevered body all night. Mercy was skipping dinner so he could eat. Mercy was love, not erasure. I dug deep, pulling from places I didn't know still existed. My throat trembled as I forced my voice past the mask, past the fear. "David!" The room fell silent. My son froze. The doctor stepped forward. The nurse's eyes widened. I coughed, the sound ragged, but I continued, desperate. "I am here." The oxygen hiss filled the pause. David's face twisted with frustration. "Mother, please. Don't make this harder. You don't understand." The doctor cut him off sharply. "No, you don't understand. This is her life, not yours. If she can speak, then she decides." David's mouth opened, then closed. For once, he had no polished words, no smooth excuses. I lay there, breath shallow, heart heavy, watching the man my son had become. The boy who once pressed quarters into a savings jar had grown into someone who now pressed for my death. And as the doctor set the clipboard aside, refusing to sign, I felt the faintest stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Because maybe, just maybe, this was not the end of my story. People saw only what I let them see. A tired old woman with rough hands and simple dresses. A mother who worked too long, spoke too softly, and lived too modestly. That was the mask I wore. Behind it lay a truth I never shared, not even with David. I started at this very hospital as a cleaner when David was 10 years old. Back then, the corridors seemed endless, the floors polished so bright I could see the outline of my own weary face as I pushed the mop. Most people never looked at me, except to scold if a trash bin overflowed or a streak showed on the tiles. But I looked. I noticed everything. The way administrators held meetings, the way supplies were ordered, the way contracts were signed. While my hands scrubbed floors, my eyes were learning. One evening after my shift, I sat on the back steps with Mr. Lawson, the old janitor who had worked there 30 years. He lit a cigarette and told me, "The ones who pay attention here aren't just the doctors. It's the ones who watch, who see the holes nobody else sees. You're one of them." First I thought nothing of it. But the seed took root. When extra shifts came, I took them. When someone called in sick, I filled in. Slowly, supervisors noticed my reliability. Within a few years, I was promoted to assist in patient records. The job paid little more, but it gave me access to something invaluable: numbers. Costs, budgets, invoices. I learned quickly that money flowed like blood through the veins of a hospital. Most people ignored it. I studied it. I taught myself, late at night, how to balance ledgers, how to read contracts, how to spot when supplies were overbilled. One day, I quietly reported a supplier charging twice the market price for gloves. The board thanked me. That year they renewed my contract. I was just a helper in their eyes, but I knew what I was building, stone by stone, brick by brick. Every month, no matter how small, I saved. Some months it was $20, others $50. When David was in college, I lived as if I earned half my salary, putting the rest aside. A friend at the hospital cafeteria, Maria, told me once, "There's a credit union that lets staff buy shares. It's small but safe. Join." That was the first key. Later, an older nurse who was retiring sold me her tiny plot of land at the edge of town. "For you," she said, "because you remind me of myself when I was young, hungry to survive." I paid her in installments over 4 years. That land. A shopping strip stands there now, bringing in rent every month. I never told David. I wanted him to build his own life, not wait for mine. By the time I turned 50, I had bought small stocks in the hospital's expansion projects. Other staff sold their shares for quick cash. Held mine. Year after year I reinvested. The administrators barely noticed the cleaner-turned assistant buying fractional shares. To them I was invisible. To me, invisibility was power. One winter, I sat with the chairman in his office. He needed funds for a new wing and was short on investors. I offered quietly. His eyebrows rose. "You?" he asked, startled. He nodded. My signature went on the papers that night. From then on, I was no longer just a worker. I was a stakeholder. To David, I remained the struggling mother. I kept my old house, patched the roof, wore thrift store clothes. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I had learned long ago. Wealth kept quiet lasts longer than wealth that shouts. I wanted him to value hard work, to know hunger so he could appreciate abundance. But instead he grew ashamed of it. He mistook humility for poverty, modesty for weakness. Sometimes I considered telling him. On nights when I held the dividend checks in my hands, I imagined saying, "Son, everything you see in this hospital, its walls, its wards, its future, I am part of it." But then I'd look at his impatient eyes, the way he rolled his shoulders when I spoke, and I stayed silent. And now, here I was, an old woman lying in a bed in the very hospital I partly owned, listening to my son try to sign my death away. He didn't know. He couldn't know. The irony twisted in my chest like a knife. For years, I had hidden the truth so he would grow into his own man. Instead, he grew into a stranger. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially in moments that matter most. And soon, the truth of who I really was, and what I truly owned, would fall like a stone into the silence my son had built. Because the hospital he thought was a place to erase me was, in fact, the very empire I had built. And I wasn't done yet. The night pressed against the hospital windows, heavy and unblinking. Machines ticked their endless rhythm beside my bed, each beep a fragile thread tying me to life. David stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, impatience vibrating off him like heat. He wanted closure, the kind that came with ink on paper, with silence in my chest. The doctor still held the clipboard. His brow furrowed, his thumb brushing the corner of the DNR form like it was poison. "Doctor," David said again, his voice tight with authority. "Sign it. You're only dragging out the inevitable." The doctor didn't move. He turned his gaze toward me, studying the thin rise and fall of my chest, the faint flicker of my eyes behind the oxygen mask. And then something shifted. Not pity. Recognition. "Mr. Hill," the doctor said slowly, "do you know who your mother is?" David blinked, caught off guard. "Of course I know who she is. She's my mother. And she's tired. This isn't living." The doctor's mouth twitched with something like disgust. He stepped closer to my bed, lowering his voice but making sure everyone in the room could hear. "Your mother isn't just a patient. She is the foundation beneath these walls. This hospital," he tapped the chart against his palm, "exists in part because of her." David frowned, his tone mocking. "What are you talking about? She's a retired laundry worker. She has nothing." The doctor turned, his eyes suddenly steel. "She has more than you'll ever know. For decades, while you were building your career, she was quietly building this hospital. She is a majority shareholder. She owns this place." The words cracked like thunder. The nurse gasped, nearly dropping the tray in her hands. Another staff member froze in the doorway. Even the hum of the machines seemed to pause, as if the hospital itself wanted to listen. David's face drained of color. That's impossible." His laugh was brittle, hollow. "You're lying. She couldn't." I wanted to laugh, but the sound came out as a rasp. My fingers twitched against the blanket, and the doctor gently squeezed my hand. "It's true," he said firmly. "I've seen the records, the land deeds, the board minutes. Your mother has been one of this hospital's silent guardians for years. She may look frail, but she is the reason you're standing in this room right now with a world-class facility around you." David's mouth opened and closed like a man drowning without water. His arrogance collapsed in real time, replaced by naked shock. "No," he stammered. "If that were true, she would have told me. She wouldn't keep that from her only son." The doctor's voice was sharp as a scalpel. "Maybe she knew you would see her as a bank account instead of a mother." The silence that followed was suffocating. David's face twisted, a storm of anger and disbelief. He jabbed a finger toward me, desperate. "Mother, tell him. Tell him he's wrong." I turned my head slowly, painfully, until my eyes met his. Behind the oxygen mask, I whispered the only word I could find. "True." The single syllable cut deeper than any speech. His face crumpled, first with confusion, then rage. "You mean to tell me," he spat, "all these years, while I begged you for help with rent, with loans, with Anna's business, you had money? You had all of this, and you let me struggle." My tears burned as they slid down my cheeks. I wanted to tell him that I let him struggle because I wanted him to grow strong. Because handouts raise beggars, but sacrifice raises men. But the truth stood naked now. He had chosen greed over gratitude. The doctor straightened, authority filling the room. "Mr. Hill, this conversation is over. Your mother is my patient, and her wishes come first. Not yours." David's hands curled into fists. He looked at me, at the doctor, at the stunned nurses. His jaw tightened, but for once words failed him. The doctor handed the clipboard back to the nurse untouched. "There will be no DNR," he said firmly. Then he looked at me, his eyes softening. "Not unless you say it yourself. And something tells me you are far from finished." For the first time since collapsing in my kitchen, I felt a flicker of power return to my body. Weak as I was, tethered to machines, I was still alive. And alive, I was dangerous to the lies my son had wrapped himself in. Because now the truth had been spoken aloud. I was not a burden. I was not a weak old woman to be erased. I was the owner of the very place where my son had tried to bury me. And the reckoning had only just begun. News travels quickly inside hospital walls. Faster than heartbeats, faster than test results. One whisper in a hallway can reach an entire floor before the hour is out. By morning, the story of what happened in my room had spread like fire through dry grass. I heard it in the way nurses lingered a little longer, adjusting my fore and smoothing my blanket with quiet reverence. I saw it in the curious stares of orderlies who paused at my door, pretending to check charts but really studying me as though I were suddenly someone else. Even the cafeteria workers, who usually bustled by without glancing at patients, now dipped their heads respectfully when they passed. It was surreal. For decades, I had walked these same halls as a cleaner, a clerk, a nameless helper. Now, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in my arms, I was seen. In the hallway, I overheard two nurses whispering. "Did you hear? That's Mrs. Hill. She's one of the owners." "Owners? You mean that sweet old lady? I thought she lived in that little house on Maple." "She does. But apparently, she's been supporting this place since before we started working here." Their voices were hushed, but their awe was loud. And louder still was the silence that followed when David walked past. He came storming in that morning, his tie crooked, his face blotched with sleepless fury. Gone was the polished confidence. What remained was desperation. Staff stepped aside, but not with respect, with wariness. Whispers trailed after him like shadows. "That's the son. The one who tried to sign her life away." By noon, the story had reached beyond the walls. Relatives of patients, visitors, even local volunteers who ran the hospital gift shop, all buzzing with the same disbelief. He wanted her dead. And all the while, she was the one keeping this place alive. The cafeteria, once noisy with clattering trays, turned into a courtroom of murmurs when David entered with Anna at his side. She was furious, her eyes sharp as broken glass. "This is humiliating," she hissed, tugging at his sleeve. "Do you understand how this makes us look? We told everyone you were the devoted son, the responsible heir. And now, they're saying you tried to kill her." David shoved his tray away untouched. "They don't know the truth." Anna's laugh was bitter. "The truth is your mother owns the hospital, and everyone knows you wanted her gone. That is the truth, David." Every table around them went quiet, ears tilted their way. He glanced up, saw the eyes on him, and left in a rush. By evening, the community outside the hospital began to stir. People who had known me through the years, neighbors, church friends, former patients whose bills I quietly helped pay, started showing up. Mrs. Delgado, the same woman whose groceries David once carried for 50 cents as a boy, stood at my bedside with tears in her eyes. "We didn't know, Margaret. We didn't know you were the reason so many of us could afford our treatments. God bless you." Her words spread like rain in a drought. Soon others came. Families who had benefited from the scholarships I funded under another name, workers who had been bailed out of debt by anonymous donations I'd given through the hospital trust. They had never known the benefactor. Till now. The irony was heavy. For years, I had been invisible, quietly doing what I could without recognition. Now that my son had tried to erase me, the entire world suddenly saw me. David returned that night, his eyes bloodshot. He tried to walk tall, but the weight of every whisper bent him down. The receptionist no longer greeted him warmly. Nurses no longer deferred to him. Even the janitors, men and women in the uniform I once wore, looked him straight in the eye with judgment. He came to my room, closing the door too loudly behind him. His voice trembled, a mix of rage and desperation. "Do you realize what you've done? They're all against me now. You made me look like a monster." I looked at him steadily, my voice still frail but steady. "I didn't make you a monster, David. You chose that path yourself." His fists clenched at his sides. "You should have told me. You should have let me help you manage all of this. Instead, you humiliated me in front of everyone." Humiliation is when a mother sells her wedding ring so her son can eat, and he later pretends not to know her at his graduation dinner, I whispered. What you feel now is not humiliation. It is consequence. His mouth opened to argue, but no sound came. He spun on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. By the end of the week, the Board of Trustees requested to see me. Word had reached them too. They wanted to ensure I was stable, wanted reassurance that my voice, as one of the hospital's largest shareholders, still carried strength. I sat up in bed with pillows stacked behind me, my hair neatly brushed by the kind nurse who had become my friend. When the board members entered, their respect was tangible. No longer did they see a patient. They saw a partner. David, standing awkwardly in the corner, could only watch as men and women twice his power deferred to me, listening intently as I thanked them for their service and promised continued support for the hospital's future. For the first time, his face revealed something I had not seen in years. Not arrogance, not disdain. Fear. Because he realized that everything he thought belonged to him, every inheritance he believed was already in his pocket, was slipping from his grasp. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. That night, as the hospital hummed with its usual rhythm, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The whispers, the visitors, the respect. It was all overwhelming. But above it all, one truth glowed steady. The son who had tried to erase me was being erased instead, not by my hands, but by his own greed revealed in the light. And soon he would face more than whispers. He would face judgment. The morning after the board's visit, sunlight slanted through the blinds of my hospital room, pale and forgiving. I had slept only a few hours, but clarity sharpened my thoughts like a blade. My body was weak, but my mind was alive with decisions. For 72 years I had lived for my son. I had given, sacrificed, endured. And now, in this bed, I understood what every mother fears to admit. Sometimes love is not enough to save a child from himself. It was time to make things official. Calling the lawyer, I asked the nurse for the phone and dialed Mr. Franklin's office. He had been my lawyer for nearly 20 years, discreet and loyal, the kind of man who understood the value of silence. When he answered, his voice was warm. Mrs. Hill, I heard about your health scare. I'm so glad you're still with us. I am, I rasped. But I need to make some changes, Franklin. Urgent ones. Within 2 hours, he arrived at the hospital, briefcase in hand. He carried with him a new draft of my will, one we had prepared years ago but never finalized. He placed it on the tray beside my bed, his eyes steady. Are you certain? He asked softly. Once this is signed, there is no going back. I looked at him, my voice unwavering. I am certain. A son who signs away his mother's life has no claim to her legacy. The documents were spread out before me. My hands trembled as I lifted the pen, but not from doubt, from finality. Each stroke across the paper felt like a door closing, one by one. I signed away the house on Maple Street, leaving it not to David, but to the women's shelter that had once taken me in after his father abandoned us. I signed over the rental properties to the hospital's charity wing, to fund treatments for families who could not afford them. I left scholarships for nursing students, for medical aids, for children who reminded me of David before greed consumed him. And finally, I designated my shares in the hospital to a trust that would ensure it remained a place of healing, not profit. Not one penny went to David. Not one penny to Anna. When I placed the pen down, the silence in the room was thick with finality. Mr. Franklin gathered the papers, nodded solemnly, and said, "Justice can take many forms. Today you've chosen yours." That evening, David burst into the room, his face red with fury. He had heard. Of course he had heard. News of wills spreads faster than wildfire in greedy ears. "You can't do this," he shouted, slamming his fist against the foot of the bed. "I'm your only son. You owe me." The words stung, not because of their truth, but because of their hollowness. "Umi." As though motherhood were a debt ledger. I lifted my frail voice, each word deliberate. "I owe you nothing. Gave you life. Gave you love. I gave you every breath of my youth. And you tried to take the last breath I had left. That was your choice. This is mine." His hands shook at his sides. "Mother, listen, Anna and I. We counted on that inheritance. We planned our future around it." I almost laughed, but the sound came out as a cough. "You planned your future on my death. How foolish." He leaned closer, desperation replacing anger. "Please, Mother. Don't do this. You don't understand, we're drowning. Debts, business failures. I only wanted relief." Relief. That was his excuse for erasing me. Relief from the weight of bills, from the pressure of a life built on appearances. I shook my head. "You wanted relief, but not redemption. There's a difference. A man who cannot face his failures will always look for someone to bury instead. You chose me." Tears pricked his eyes, but I saw no remorse in them, only fear of loss. "You still have time to change it," he whispered desperately. "No," I said firmly. "You had time. Years of it. And you spent every moment mocking, dismissing, and finally betraying me. My wealth will serve those who know the value of sacrifice, not those who spit on it." The door opened quietly. Mr. Franklin stepped back in with 2 witnesses, nurses from the floor who had agreed to observe the signing. Their presence made the moment heavier. David looked at them, then back at me, panic in his eyes. "You can't mean this." In front of them. In front of everyone. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes. The world will know I chose justice over blood." The nurses' faces betrayed nothing, but I saw the faintest flicker of approval in their eyes. When David stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, I lay back against my pillows, exhausted but relieved. For the first time in years I felt free. I had untangled myself from the rope of his greed. I had chosen dignity over obligation. And though it broke my heart to admit it, I had accepted the truth. Sometimes the family you give birth to is not the family that carries you. That night, as the machines ticked beside me, I whispered a prayer into the silence. "Let my wealth heal where my son's love failed. Let my choices serve those who will honor them. Let this be my legacy, not him but the good I leave behind." And in that prayer I found peace. The corridor outside my room echoed with footsteps long before the door slammed open. I knew it was David before I even saw him. My son never walked quietly when he was angry. His heels struck like hammers, announcing his rage to the world. He barged in without knocking, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched tight. For a moment he didn't speak. He just stood there, chest heaving, glaring at me like a stranger who had come to collect a debt. "You've ruined me," he finally hissed. "Do you hear me? You've destroyed everything." I adjusted myself on the bed, though my body ached. I wanted to sit straighter, to meet his fury with dignity. "I ruined you?" I asked softly. "No, David. You ruined yourself." He stalked toward the bed, hands balled into fists. "Don't twist this. You had the power to give me everything. The house, the properties, the shares. You could have set me free. And instead you gave it all away. To strangers." "They aren't strangers," I said, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "They are people I've helped, people who will build something with it. You only wanted to bury me so you could live comfortably. That's not freedom. That's greed." His face contorted. "I am your son." The words hung in the air like a verdict. 4 years that had been his shield. His excuse for entitlement. His justification for cruelty. But tonight they rang hollow. I looked at him long and hard, and for the first time, I let go of the last rope binding me to him. "You were my son the day I held your fevered body and prayed you would breathe again," I whispered. "You were my son the day I sold my ring to pay for your school books. But the day you signed my death on a form, you ceased to be my son." His lips parted, stunned. I continued, tears brimming in my eyes but my voice like iron. "Blood is not enough to make a son. Love makes a son. Sacrifice makes a son. And you threw both away." He stepped back as if struck. The fury in his eyes faltered, replaced by something I had not seen in years: fear. "You can't mean that," he muttered. "You can't just cut me off." I held his gaze. "You cut yourself off the moment you wished me dead." The door creaked open. A nurse peeked in, concerned by the shouting. Behind her, I saw 2 security officers hovering, summoned by the commotion. Their eyes locked on David, assessing him like a threat. "Sir," one said firmly, "we'll have to ask you to lower your voice or step outside." David whipped toward them, his face twisted with humiliation. "This is my mother. You can't throw me out of her room." But the irony was sharp enough to draw blood. The very hospital he had thought to use as his stage for my death was now a place where he held no power. I raised a trembling hand. "It's all right," I told the officers. "Let him speak. He needs to hear the truth." They nodded, but they didn't leave. They stayed as silent witnesses, a reminder that his intimidation no longer ruled here. David turned back to me, desperation replacing fury. His voice cracked. "Please, Mother. Don't do this. I made mistakes, yes, but I'm still your son. You don't want to die leaving this rift between us. You'll regret it." I studied him, the lines of his face so familiar yet so foreign. I wanted to see the boy who once pressed coins into a jar, the child who whispered, "You, always you," during our gratitude game. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man who measured love in assets and compassion in contracts. "I will not regret choosing dignity," I said softly. "I will not regret choosing justice. What I would regret, what I already regret, is believing for so long that you loved me for who I was, not what I had." He shook his head violently, like a child refusing to hear. "No, no, no." The nurse whispered to the officers, and they stepped forward. "Sir," one said, voice firm, "you need to leave now." David spun, furious. "You can't." But before he could finish, they guided him toward the door. His protests grew louder, echoing down the corridor. "This isn't over. You'll see, Mother. You'll regret this." The sound faded, swallowed by the hum of the hospital. And in the sudden quiet, I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my cheeks. Not tears of weakness, but of release. For the first time in decades, I was free from the weight of his demands. The nurse came to my side, adjusting my blankets gently. Her hand lingered on mine, warm and steady. "You were brave," she whispered. "Not many mothers could have said what you said." I squeezed her hand faintly. It wasn't bravery. It was truth. And sometimes the truth is the hardest thing a mother can give. She smiled sadly. "Maybe. But it's also the thing that saves her." That night, as I drifted into sleep, I thought of David's face, twisted with anger, cracked with fear. The final confrontation had ended not with reconciliation, but with clarity. And though it broke my heart, it also set it free. The days that followed unfolded like the slow turning of a season. I remained in the hospital, not as a patient lost in the background, but as a woman whose truth had finally been spoken. My body, though fragile, began to mend. The doctors adjusted my treatment, nurses checked on me with gentle respect, and visitors came not out of obligation, but gratitude. I had thought the end of my story would be written in silence, my son's cold signature erasing me. Instead, it was being written in voices. Voices of people who remembered, people who cared, people who finally saw me. Each morning I woke to the sun spilling through the blinds, golden on the hospital floor. My chest still ached, but each breath felt like a small triumph. I learned to walk again down the corridor, each step steadier than the last, nurses cheering softly when I made it from one wall to the other. One nurse pressed my hand and whispered, "We are proud to serve your hospital." The words filled me with a quiet pride I had never allowed myself to feel. For decades, I had hidden my part in this place, choosing humility over recognition. Now, in my weakness, the truth had given me strength. The community arrived in waves. Families I had helped unknowingly through scholarships. Children who had grown into doctors and nurses because of funds I once slipped into an anonymous trust. A mother whose child had survived surgery because her bill had been covered quietly by my donations. They brought flowers, cards, and tears. "You never wanted credit," one woman said, "but you deserve the world's thanks." I smiled, my voice soft. "I never did it for thanks. I did it so the world would be a little kinder when I was gone." David did not return. Rumor said he had been seen in town. His head bowed, avoiding eye contact, shame following him like a shadow. Anna, his wife, filed for separation when she realized the inheritance was gone. The house they bought together was up for sale. I did not rejoice in his downfall. No mother truly can. But I no longer grieved either. I had reached a place beyond grief, acceptance. Sometimes love means holding on. Sometimes it means letting go. One afternoon, the hospital board gathered in my room. Men and women in suits, carrying files, but their expressions were warm. "Mrs. Hill," the chairman said, "we want to assure you that your wishes for this hospital will be honored. Your trust will fund expansions, scholarships, and care for families who need it most. Your legacy will live in every brick we lay, every child we heal." Tears blurred my vision. "That is all I wanted," I whispered. "Not my name on a building. Not a statue. Just lives made better because I lived." One morning I asked the nurse to open the blinds fully. Light poured into the room, chasing away shadows. I sat there for a long time, gazing out at the courtyard below. Children were playing, patient siblings, running free while their parents waited inside. And I thought, this is what it was all for. Not the money, not the power, but this simple sound of joy. That night I asked for a piece of paper. With trembling hands I wrote a letter, not to David, but to whoever might one day sit in a bed like mine, feeling forgotten. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it is the people who hold your hand when you falter, who whisper strength into your silence, who stand beside you when others walk away. Do not measure your worth by those who abandon you. Measure it by the love you give and the lives you touch. I folded the paper and asked the nurse to place it in the hospital archives. "Why?" she asked. "So someone else one day will know they are not alone," I said. On my final night in that room, I lay beneath the hum of the machines, no longer afraid. My story had shifted. I was no longer the mother discarded by her son, the old woman hidden away. I was Margaret Hill, the woman who turned sacrifice into legacy, who turned betrayal into justice. The world outside would remember my son for his cruelty, perhaps, for the hospital that stood because I believed small acts mattered, for the lives saved because I chose to give quietly, for the truth that, in the end, family is not blood but love. I closed my eyes, the sound of children's laughter still echoing in my mind, and whispered a final prayer. Let my life speak longer than my breath. Let my love reach farther than my blood. Let my legacy be kindness. My friends, let us remember Margaret's story. A mother's love may be deep, but it cannot be measured in what she leaves behind for the ungrateful. It must be measured in what she gives to the world. Never forget, true family is not the ones who demand your last breath. It is the ones who fight to keep you alive. Subscribe for more stories where justice finds its way, even when hope seems lost. Thanks for watching. Remember, family isn't always blood, it's the ones who truly stand by you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.